We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Former President Trump has been found liable for an attack on columnist E. Jean Carroll, and with that jury decision, has confused half the nation who doesn't have a law degree, and even some of them who do. Now, to figure out precisely what happened, what the charges were against Trump, and what the results were, we're joined by Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, man about town, uprising super host, Mr. Scott DeCosenza. Thanks for being here, Scott.
Thank you, Mark, for elevating me to superhost status. I appreciate that.
So you are our talking Liberty superstar. Now, Scott, this thing with E. Jean Carroll, so she accused him of rape in a New York City department store at some point during the mid-90s. And
I think they finally narrowed it down to 96 by the
95
time
or 96.
Well, that was the initial report, yes.
Yeah. Now, this has really confused everybody because she accused Donald Trump of rape. Now, this is a civil trial, so there's no jail on this. It's a cash-based trial. She accused him of rape, and the jury of 9 came back and said that, no, he didn't commit rape, but he did commit sexual battery, which was never alleged, was it, Scott?
Well, yes, it was alleged.
Okay.
The sexual battery was in the form of digital penetration,
Right.
as I understand it. And one thing is, the way that I think it's helpful to think about it is the jury did not say that Mr. Trump did not rape Ms. Carroll. What they said was Ms. Carroll didn't prove beyond a preponderance of the evidence that Donald Trump raped her. So,
Okay. But how then did she prove that the sexual battery took place?
you know, when these jurors start selling their stories, Mark, it's going to be interesting to read how they threaded that needle. But they just believe that testimony more. I mean, because this is basically dependent solely on the testimony of Ms. Carroll. This is not, there were no witnesses to it or anything like that we know of. Mr. Trump denied the whole thing entirely. It's not like he said, I touched her this far and not this far. So that's the only thing that kind of makes sense to me as I look at the news stories. Unfortunately, because it's federal court, no cameras are allowed. And so we weren't allowed to sort of, witness her testimony and see what she may have said that might produce this result.
So I wanted to clear up a quick legal point on this. So we had people like Representative Eric Swalwell this morning, the morning after the verdict came down, saying that Trump is guilty of such and such. And I think it's quite a distinction, isn't it? Because in a civil trial, you're never guilty of anything, are you? You're found liable for.
Well, you'll notice the way I crafted this writing for the written piece in Liberty Nation,
Yes.
And I said he was held liable because that is what the legal standard is. It's a liability standard, and in fact, you talked about whether it's a criminal trial, and a criminal standard would be that Donald Trump would have had to have been the evidence would have had to amounted to proof beyond any reasonable doubt, and that's not the case here. It's just a preponderance of the evidence, which is just one measure more than 50% that was likely to occur, and that is what the jury found.
So Donald Trump and his team have already indicated that they're going to appeal this. Now, what form would that appeal take? Because I believe much of the contention is that. Now, I don't want to get into who's right and wrong on this, but it seems to me that it was her word against his. She couldn't remember which year it was. She claims to have told at least 2 people of the events that she alleges directly after they allegedly occurred, but they also couldn't remember the years. And this seems, there are a lot of holes in this story, which can happen, right? It can happen, but
yes, and it's important to remember that you don't get to an appeal a verdict simply because you don't like the verdict. There needs to be for the appeal to be heard. Now, you can sort of say that and file the appeal, and that's just going to cost you the filing fee, and it's going to get tossed out. But for the appeal to be heard, the appeals court has to agree that there are grounds for an appeal. Now, there may be grounds that we haven't even thought about, meaning there could be some procedural ground that hasn't been widely discussed that Trump's attorneys think they can, make hay with. There are any number of things that could be it. But one thing for sure, legally is not. It is, I just didn't like the way this jury returned their verdict.
Okay, because that appears to be the big thing for Trump and his legal team, doesn't it? Which is
Yeah.
got to be concerning for them, seeing as they're intending to appeal.
There's the sort of common parlance, and then there's what we file in court, and oftentimes there's some divergence there.
So this was a federal court, so it would go to an appellate court.
So yes, there could be some more proceedings in the district court, but the court immediately above the district court is the Second Circuit Court of Appeals,
Okay.
and then the United States Supreme Court. But I can tell you that the likelihood that any civil case that reached a jury verdict in the district court would then find its way to the U.S. Supreme Court is exceedingly rare. Now, there are Trump cases that certainly have gone before, and I would never say never. I would just say, boy, if I were a betting man, I would not bet on, and I wouldn't even bet on it getting a proper hearing at the appellate court level. And what I mean by that is most appeal requests are rejected by most courts.
Okay, I think one of the angles, and I've only heard rumor of this, so I don't know if this is going to be one of the angles of appeal for the Trump team, is that they're alleging that obviously this is political persecution, and where that comes from, as they say, is that the state of New York opened up like a 1-year window for which alleged crimes could be prosecuted civilly. And it really seems to many people that they created this 1-year window. So you can't take somebody to court for a crime that happened a long time ago last year. You won't be able to do it next year, but this year you can. Just this 1 year. And this seems, I think, to many people who are supportive of President Donald Trump, that it was crafted specifically just so a case could be brought against Donald Trump.
Well, I don't know that there's any evidence to suggest that that's
the case.
Of
course.
And I don't, there's lots of people for whom, they don't want to have to defend cases that arose from fact patterns long ago. And you can see why. So Donald Trump has to fight this case that he did something vile and criminal and nefarious in 1995. Well,
or 1996.
Or 1996. And it's like, if you bring that case a couple years later, there may be evidence that's preserved. Maybe his calendar, from a desktop or somebody's recollection that he spent
a fancy New York department store, for example, will have cameras
absolutely
everywhere. I mean, that's
they would.
The reality of it. Although it's unlikely that they'll have kept those recordings for, what are we talking now? Almost 30 years, right?
I think that the storage requirements would even cause Bergdorf's rather to blush for that level of warehouse space back when they were actual physical tapes. Do you know what I mean? And just to be clear, it is it's a protection for the accused that we don't have to suffer through decades-long or decades-old charges because of the difficulty in fighting it, And the truth is that so many claims in court these days, even though as we teach, the burden of proof lies on the state, and in this case, the burden of proof lies on the plaintiff. But at the same time, when you're making heinous allegations against someone, and those allegations are buoyed up by the big box media on a daily, if not more, basis, well, you're really behind the 8 ball as a defendant, and then having to overcome the burden of coming up with, 25, 30-year-old receipts for something, it seems almost insurmountable.
Just one final quick question on this, and a point, I think, on this topic, Scott, is, so this being a civil trial, that even if it were a criminal trial, there's nothing here that precludes Donald Trump from continuing his campaign for president. Even if he were in prison for this, he could still campaign and be president, right? So
states control who is on the ballot in that state for president. And I say that preceding my answer because I would have to check all 50 states and make sure that there's no bar for felons appearing on the ballot in their states. I don't know that there are any. And I do know that Lyndon LaRouche, famously a Democrat, ran for president many times from his prison cell, a felon. And
as a socialist, he ran, but Democrat socialist, I repeat myself.
Well, actually, I think he was on the Democrat ticket in some jurisdictions. Yeah, I say that I may always make a point when I talk about him to talk about he's a Democrat because he was on the fringe of the Democrat Party, and certainly he was on that fringe. Some folks in America had it in their head that he was a libertarian. And I've heard a couple times like, oh, yeah, wasn't he a libertarian? And I'm always loath to let that go by unremarked upon. And so in any case, he was a Democrat and a member of the Democrat Party at some point.
All right, we'll keep following this story on the page of libertynation.com. Please do read Scott's coverage of it. And we'll be right back with Scott talking about Tucker Carlson's grand move to Twitter. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5. Produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone. Hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner. Joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors. Deconstructing leftist narratives. Debating the hot topics. And remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe
You only
space.
did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5.